Thanks a lot for having me here today. And thanks for CCAT and Professor Sam Labby, Professor DeLaurentis to give me this opportunity to work on some interesting idea we actually had quite a few years ago. Actually, when I joined Purdue here about 12 years ago, 14 years ago, we actually had this kind of idea, like we will probably have some air taxi system in the near future. I actually worked with some multimodal transportation systems with Professor Srini Pita when he was still at Purdue, and his former postdoctor Lily Du, who is now at the University of Florida. We had some quite interesting ideas, but because of several reasons, we didn't really put all these ideas together. And we are really thankful for CCAT to give us a chance to work on this interesting project. So in this talk, I'm going to go through several things we have been working on. First, I'm going to introduce the background of the project, and then we are going to introduce a bilinear programming model we have been formulating to hopefully optimize the air taxi systems under the concept of advanced air mobility. I will also present some numerical results, and also in the end, I'm going to talk about some future work, and of course, I will take many questions if you have any. So some background. So advanced air mobility, I think that this concept has been changing like many times during the past few years. In my opinion, also in some of my colleagues' opinion, it is actually just a new or modified air transportation system that can move people and also cargoes between places previously not served or underserved by aviation, either at the local level, regional level, or intra-regional level. And most importantly, we're talking about advanced air mobility at urban areas, which is so-called the urban air mobility. So urban air mobility is actually one of the operations under the big umbrella of advanced air mobility. And this is hopefully going to provide a substantial benefit to the US industry and the public. And many advanced air mobility operations need to be affordable to masses. This is one of the, I think, one of the key concerns by a lot of government agencies and also our industry partners. And we also recognize the economics of advanced air mobility operations may require autonomous operations, which includes autonomous control systems and also some autonomous vehicles. So just a snapshot of the current status. It's actually quite I would say in infant area of this in this domain. There are a lot of things we as academia and industry people, we can help to maturize this new transportation mode. In terms of urban air mobility, which is something we actually started, also some concept I think precedes advanced air mobility. Urban air mobility envisions a safe and efficient aviation transportation system that will highly automate that will use highly automated aircraft to transport passengers or cargoes within the urban and suburban areas. Some potential applications include air cargo systems, air taxi systems, which is a topic we are going to present today. And also it includes emergency services and sometimes surveillance services as well. Some challenges exist for urban air mobility. Number one is the supporting infrastructure systems, because currently there are not much available infrastructures to support the operations of urban air mobility. And also we need to integrate the current air transportation and air traffic control system to handle these new transportation vehicles and modes. And also we have to integrate urban air mobility with the ground transportation, which has been there for many years, because you don't want to dissect these two important transportation modes. And also there is a need to study the cost, benefits, risk analysis, and also this is part of the concerns or part of the constraints in our work, which will be presented today. In terms of air taxi systems, there have been a lot of research recently. Most of these research or operations have been focusing on the small and electrical vertical takeoff and landing vehicle aircraft, so-called eVTOL, that are expected to transport on-demand users in metropolitan cities with an average capacity of 4. So this number 4 is not really our kind of concept. It is based on a lot of surveys, a lot of other studies. So in our work, in our model, which will be presented today here, we use the capacity of 4 for each vehicle, which can be changed, of course, and which can be also changed for different types of vehicles. Some benefits of air taxi system. First of all, it will extend the application of the on-demand door-to-door transportation to on-demand skyport to skyport transportation. In this presentation and also in this project, we use the term skyport, which is denoting some infrastructure like you can land these air vehicles. And this definition or term has been changed quite a lot in the past few years. People, I think, initially called them vertiports and then aerodromes, and then probably skyports, or maybe they have changed this year. So in either case, it represents, the skyport represents the place on the ground you can land and take off these aerial vehicles. And also air taxi offers rapid and reliable transportation service within cities and between suburbs and cities. And hopefully it will offer a more convenient and affordable, environmental friendly options for users. Some research problems in this category, in this domain. So number one is modeling of complex multimodal transportation system, including air taxi, which has been attracting interest from academia, and a real and near real-time and optimal assignment of air taxis. And of course, there's going to be path planning, because air taxi is different from ground taxi system. There's no really streets or highway in the air, so there is a need to probably redefine the path for the taxi in the air. I highlighted several status of kind of research these days. Number one, NASA, FAA, and some other government agencies have several initiatives. In particular, NASA has several university lead initiatives which are focusing on advanced air mobility. Purdue is leading 2 of these projects studying the security, modeling, safety, and also some economical impacts of the advanced air mobility systems. And also there is an interest from the military, particularly for the Air Force. They are also engaged in studying the air taxi systems. And also, I think early this year, I have seen several reports like major airlines, such as American Airlines. They have acquired several air taxi companies to basically extend their market to include air taxi systems. And also there is a big kind of trend in aeronautic domain or sector to design these some new type of vehicles which will be helpful, which will be used in air taxi systems, because we envision you are not going to use the big airports you probably will have to feed certain smaller airports, some helipads, those kind of operations that will require some new design of the aircraft. This slide shows our originally proposed research work submitted to CCAT a few years ago. It basically mimics the ground ride-sharing system. And here we have 2 focuses of this project. One is to model and develop some distributed computational methods to solve this problem. Number 2, we were intended to address some uncertainties in the system, such as the travel time, such as cyber attacks, such as miscommunication between different agents. So in terms of the cyber attack or the way of mitigating the uncertainties and miscommunications, I worked with DeLaurentis, the PI of the project, and also several other folks in our school. We actually think this is a standalone problem which can be separated from the platform for modeling, computation, optimization we are going to present today. We actually have had quite a few students who are developing resilient control methods to mitigate the uncertainties or cyber attacks or any type of miscommunication that may happen in the ride-sharing system. That includes ground transportation and air transportation. I will be happy to discuss this topic offline. This is a snapshot of the methods we have been developing to address these cyber attack or uncertainty issues. And today, this presentation will be focusing on the modeling and optimization techniques to solve the ride-sharing air taxi system. And here is also the snapshot from our proposal. So basically, we envision the passenger will request a ride to their destination. The majority of the ride will be considering will be using the air taxi system. But before that, you have to either walk to the skyport or take taxi, ground taxi, or some other ground transportation system to your original or departuring skyport, and then you are going to you will be picked up by the air taxi, and then you will be dropped off at your destination skyport, not your requested destination area. Then you are going to use the ground transportation to your destination. Basically, there is a first mile and last mile problem included in this study. In this formulation, you are going to see in a moment, we are going to model the first mile and the last mile requirements as a certain time constraint in the system. There are of course some uncertainties in terms of ground transportation because, for example, if you want to take a air taxi, let's say at 10 o'clock, you may arrive maybe a few minutes late than the request time. There is going to be some future work studying how we should be able to, or how our algorithms can address these uncertainties in the model. So talking about the air taxi ride-sharing problem, in short, ATRP, our objective is to efficiently and effectively provide on-demand shared air taxi service to users. And we are going to formulate this problem by optimization using available air taxi and minimize the number of empty seats during the flights, while also providing a convenient and affordable mode for transportation for users. The stakeholders for this study could be passengers, air taxi vehicle manufacturers, because they will have certain operational requirements and capacity requirements for this new system, and the ride-sharing request platforms companies that provide services. The scenarios include the user's request origin destination pairs with desired departure and arrival times, which is usually what you do for ground ride-sharing system. And these users are willing to share air taxis with other users to reduce cost, but also value convenience and travel time. The main challenge is to develop models and algorithms for systems that can assign users to air taxis with compatible routes and schedules to minimize the user's travel time and cost. And this problem involves multiple considerations such as air taxi scheduling, passenger matching, path planning, and pricing strategies. It also requires addressing various technological, logistical, regulatory, and economic challenges such as managing demand variability, ensuring safety and reliability. Reliability has been a major concern for this study here as well. Optimizing operational costs and complying with regulatory requirements. The good news is actually currently we don't have much regulatory requirements because the system is not there yet, but we are trying to make some recommendations or suggestions to these regulations. Overall, solving the ATRP problem requires a multidisciplinary approach: aviation, transportation, data science, operation research, and economics. Fortunately, CCAT have a lot of experts in all these domains, so we can work with. So the problem formulation. So we have several assumptions. The first one is the planning horizon is long enough for problem to be solvable. I think this is a standard kind of assumption we have for either ground transportation or air transportation, because you of course want to have enough time to deliver passengers or goods to your destination. So this is the first assumption. Secondly, each air taxi always has full battery, so it can take off at any time from any skyport. This is a very strong or very restrictive assumption, which can potentially be really relaxed in the future. The reason we make this assumption here is because we don't have much kind of data or historical data to take into account the factor in our model. But once we have more data, once we have more experiments, we will have more detailed constraints to be added in the system. So this assumption could be relaxed in the future. And we also assume the electric energy consumption of air taxi takeoff and landing is approximately the same, which is not exactly true because based on my experience for general air aviation and also commercial air transportation systems, takeoff and landing are very different in terms of energy use. But we make this assumption just because we don't have enough data to see the difference. The objective is to minimize the waiting time of the users, and we try to minimize the cost of the air taxis and the number of unserved ride-sharing requests. And these three will be combined as our object function in the moment you will see. These are some notations. I will skip the discussion, the details of the notations. Whenever we use it, I'm going to present the meanings of these either variables or parameters. Also from this slide as well. The decision variables for our model is can be classified in three categories, which are denoted on this slide right here. So the first type of variable is to determine if a vehicle will appear at a skyport at a certain time as a decision. The second type of variables are the vehicle travels from skyport to the other one. Basically, it will land. It will pick up some passengers from skyport I, and then they're going to drop off or pick up another passenger to share the ride at skyport J. We also have the third class of design variables, which is the assignment. So if a vehicle V is assigned to a user P, then this variable AVP is going to be equal to 1. So this ensures we have a kind of mapping or matching between the vehicles and the passengers. The objective, as we mentioned, has three things included. The first one, which is denoted J1 here, represent the waiting time of the users. The second one is the operating cost of air taxis. The third one is the penalty for unserved requests. We have a simple weight here, W1, W2, W3. These can be further studied to include some practical ways among these different objectives in terms of their cost, monetary cost. As a matter of fact, President DeLaurentis, the PI of the project, myself and Professor Crossley, our department head, have been working on some studies how we can basically relate, how we can combine different aspects of the cost into a single objective. For example, your objective as a passenger in terms of the time might be different from the cost of the from the point of view of the operators of the air taxi systems, just as an example. We have several constraints for this model. Of course, the first few are representing the binary features of our decision variables. If we notice here, equation number 6 denotes a design variable, which is not exactly binary. The reason is because there are a lot of computational issues, which is always the challenge for many transportation systems. Binary problems are much harder to solve. So we actually did some study to relax the second type of constraints to be continuous between 0 and 1. We can do the similar things for the first and the third types of variables. We didn't do that because so far it didn't give us too much trouble. Like your problem is unsolvable because these two types of variables are binary. If there's a need, we can certainly do further study to see if we can relax these two constraints to be continuous. Constraint number 8 represents the initial positions of the air taxis at certain airports at a certain time. This actually have been changed during the process of research because we are trying to address some time varying features in the model, and we try to solve the problem using similar concepts of receding horizon. And if you use those type of methods, your aircraft, your air taxi vehicles will not be at the airport exactly at the time. So there are some other considerations when we further improve the computational efficiency by developing some distributed methods, and this constraint number 8 will be changed in the future. Not in the future, it has been changed during the process. Constraint number 8 is the user pair. Sorry, number 10 is the user pair of the vehicles and the passengers. Number 9, I'm looking at my notes here. It's because it's quite complicated. It means at each time t, each air taxi will appear at most one skyport, because you cannot split the air taxi vehicles into different places at a single time. Number 11 here is the air taxi vehicle capacity. As we mentioned, based on the common study or common opinion, we need to have 4 passengers on each vehicle, not including pilots if the vehicle is not autonomous. This can certainly be changed, of course. If you look at this constraint here, this constraint is dependent on each vehicle. So if each vehicle has different capacity, we can certainly change this CV to be vehicle dependent. Number 12 is the is a constraint to make sure air taxi can only pick up a user after the request has been made. Because you cannot predict where these requests will come from, or when these requests will come. And of course, based on some other statistical studies or machine learning methods, you probably have some better idea, so you can better locate or relocate your vehicles to a better place, so you can or you can shorten the pickup time. But this is not part of our constraint at this moment yet. Constraint number 13 is means that the passengers will be dropped off within the maximum trip time, because we do have a expected drop-off time for each passenger in the model. Number 14 is the route capacity. If you look at this capacity here, this CIG represents like you cannot have these many vehicles on a certain route, or you cannot have these many vehicles at a particular skyport. And you can also see here, this is skyport dependent. So at this moment, we use the same capacity for each constraint, but this can certainly be changed, because you can see the CIG are depending on the skyport, and it also depends on the time. This is also one of the features in this study here, because we envision in terms of advanced air mobility in the urban area of the UAM system, you probably have different capacities on different routes, depending on your weather, depending on some airspace restrictions. So this CIG can be time dependent, but in this study here, we use a uniform capacity just to prototype our model. Number 15 is the minimum travel time between skyports. This is also going to be time dependent, time vary. It means if you travel from skyport I to skyport J, you have to spend this minimum amount of time. And of course, this time can be changed depending on the operational environment, the weather, the crew, the status of the vehicle. So this is also time dependent, also skyport dependent. Number 16 is not actually a constraint in terms of the physical systems. It is actually combined with the constraint number 6 to make sure we can actually relax this parameter to be continuous instead of being binary, so we can improve the computational efficiency. As we mentioned earlier, we can do similar things to constraints number 5 and number 7 to make them also continuous. So the model we just presented is actually a bilinear constraint model. There are a lot of methods to relax or to convert this model to be linear. We use the very oldest, one of the oldest method, which is big M, which is we understand it's not efficient, it's not the best method, but we just try to make sure we have a method to make our model work. So we just used the simplest model, big M method, to convert the bilinear model to a linear model. Now I'm going to present some numerical results. So before that, we actually did some kind of manual verification to make sure the outputs from our optimization model is going to be correct or optimal. So we generate a very simple scenario. We have two air taxis, vehicles, V1 and V2. We have two passengers, P1 and P2. And then we have two ride sharing requests. And then we have 6 skyports in the study, in this verification here. So we actually generated several scenarios. I'm presenting 4 of them here. The highlighted here, the first scenario is actually the optimal solution from our optimizer, which is the case like the vehicle number 2 will be assigned to pick up passengers number 1 and number 2. We also studied the cases which is not optimal and see what would be the cost. And we can easily compute for this very simple scenario by hand. Our output from our model using the Groovy optimizer is actually optimal, and others are not optimal because they have a higher, worse cost object functions. We actually did several studies for those simple cases, like we can really verify by hand or visually that is indeed optimal solutions. So we are quite confident that the model we presented are going to provide optimal solution. And we also, this is the case, the scenario 1 actually, the optimal case generated from our optimizer. So vehicles was first arrived at skyport number 5. And then not arrived at skyport 5, it was located at skyport 5, and then vehicles is at skyport number 6. So vehicle 1 is going to pick up, will stay at skyport number 5. Vehicle 2 stays at 6 and picks up passenger 2 because passenger 2 was requesting a ride from skyport 6. So and so on and so forth. So this is the scenario we can actually explain from the result produced by our optimizer. Such that we can check this is indeed number 1 feasible, number 2 it's optimal. We also did several other studies to study some other scenarios, which is more complicated, which has more vehicles and more passengers, and we can also explain these results by the optimized variables from our optimizer. And this is the timeline which is generated from the results of the model. So based on these studies, we are going to present some other numerical results in a moment. But we do want to emphasize several things for this model. Again, I confess this is not the best efficient way of converting the bilinear model to linear model, because we do notice some robust issues for this big M method. There is a beta here. Beta is basically penalizing. It's a factor in our object function which penalize the unserved requests. These two parameters are pretty sensitive in terms of our computation for the models. They need to be tuned to obtain feasible and optimal results. The interesting part here is that as long as you have some parameters beta and m that can work with the model, regardless of the values of this model, of these parameters beta and m's, as long as they can make our code work, they actually provide exactly the same solution, which means these methods are actually working. It's just like they may not be the most efficient parameters, they may not be the most efficient ways of solving the model. So there would be some further studies to see how or if there is any better methods to solve this optimization model. We also noticed if the beta is too small, the air taxi may not be assigned to any users, which is understandable because it's penalizing the unserved requests. If M is too big, a simulation time will increase, which is also similar to other reports or in literature when you use any big M methods. And we also have some statistical studies by students. In general, if M is less than beta, approximately half of the value of the data, and if beta is much larger than the maximum value of the object function, which of course is unknown in the beginning, we have a quite efficient result, computational result based on this model and the methods. And here I'm going to present the some numerical methods. So the simulation time, which is basically the time horizon we are studying for this entire ride sharing system, is approximately 4 hours. And we use the 1 minute time intervals to discretize the time. And this slide shows different scenarios. I'm using exactly the same way from my students' report. So the name here has different numbers and the letters in it. The first number here represents number of vehicles, air taxi vehicles. The second number here represents number of passengers. Other numbers or letters represent different scenarios, like different requests from different airports. And we run this actually. We randomly generate these scenarios with the fixed number of skyports, fixed number of requests, fixed number of passengers, and fixed number of vehicles. And we run each scenario randomly, I think more than 50 times. And then we compute the average cost and the CPU time. The cost may not be meaningful because it is averaging from different scenarios. The computation time is what we are most interested in because, number one, we are sure our model is correct. They produce the optimal solution. What is concerning is how fast or how efficient our model is going to run. So we are mostly interested in these average CPU times in seconds. And also with the if we want to solve this model once for all, using my students' MacBook laptop, we can solve at most 15 vehicles with 30 passengers scenario, which is shown in the last row here. Once we increase these number of vehicles, number of passengers, the code will not work. And that's why we have some further distributed optimization methods, which will be presented in a moment. We also studied several cases that will actually affect the computability of our methods, of our model. So in this slide here, we are showing some results with so-called relaxed time window. Relaxed time window is basically means the users make a request for a longer time. Like I'm going to make a request to take a taxi in an hour, and I'm going to expect it to arrive at my destination in 3 hours. So it's a longer time horizon. And when this time window is long, which is so-called relaxed, of course, the model solves the problem much faster. And if we reduce the time window, which is shown on this slide here, which is so-called the tight time window, the computation will increase dramatically. So the time is the time window requested by the user actually affects the efficiency of our model. And we are trying to, at this moment, we're trying to see how we can address this issue, because we expect model which will be independent on the at least the requested time, the time window that people would be interested in. So as we mentioned, this solve once for all kind of method will not work for many passengers when you have reasonably more passengers and vehicles. So we developed some methods, which is, I'm not sure this batch optimization is the best word to describe our approach. Essentially, this approach is inspired by the control community, which is my background, the receding horizon control. Sometimes people call it model predictive control. Basically, we try to split the time into different chunks, and then we're going to solve the problems in a smaller time window. And then we take actions for the first maybe half or one third of the time window, the shortened time window for the control actions, and then we're going to move the time window forward. So basically, we try to solve a smaller time horizon problem and consecutively. In this case, we can dramatically reduce the dimension of our problem. So in this practice, we still solve the 4-hour air taxi problem, and we divided the 4 hours into 10 minutes, which is a much smaller time window. And for this, we have 24 batches for the 4-hour time window. And this delta t, which is the shortened time window we are solving the problem, can actually be determined based on the average CPU time, because we want to make sure the result will be produced before your request has been made, or before your passenger is expected to pick it up. And also this time window can be determined based on the arc capacities, update frequency. This is part of the so-called real-time demands. Basically, the users, you will expect certain users will make requests at different times. In the meantime, the environment might change. For example, one of the key constraints in this model is the capacity of the route, the capacity of skyports, which for air transportation can be highly impacted by the weather. So these constraints may change. So with the change, we can actually change your the receiving horizon to make sure you consider these time varying factors in the system. With that being said, we did this so-called batch optimization method, which are shown in the slide here. So this left-hand side is exactly what we have seen just a few minutes ago for the solve once for all method. This right-hand side here is some result with the batch optimization. And you can clearly see for majority of the cases, these CPU time are reduced. In particular, for the cases when we have a reasonable number of passengers, reasonable number of vehicles, we can actually solve these problems in a reasonable amount of time. So the max is around like 400, 500 seconds, which is quite reasonable to solve such a huge size problem. And this slide shows the relaxed time window, which is the requests are much longer in the future. And this slide shows tighter time window, which is like the passengers are making very short notice. And the batch optimization can solve both cases. And we have been solving up to 200 vehicles and 500 passengers. So some future work. So number one, we are going to consider flight dynamics of air taxis, and we are going to consider some travel time, which is essentially mostly the ground transportation times to include certain uncertainties. And we have some expertise in doing stochastic programming or chance programming to consider these variation or uncertainties in the travel time. We are also going to consider real-time ground and air traffic conditions, which is basically the time window, the delta T we have seen several minutes ago, will be dependent on these changes of the conditions. We are also planning to do some experiments to collect some data to as some modeling parameters in our model using the Purdue UAS research facility. Most importantly, we're going to collect some data for flight dynamics, travel time estimation, distribution for aerial vehicles, takeoff and landing parameters such as time, energy cost, and also some wind turbulence affects the path planning, which includes the arc capacity and also some travel time between different skyports. This is not a lip service. We are actually doing this future work so that we can make our model better or more realistic to consider actual ride-sharing system that includes aerial vehicles. I want to show a slide here to present our UAS research facility. This is actually the largest indoor UAV test center in the US. It is using one of the hangars at Purdue Airport. I forgot exactly how large it is. It's probably around 5,000 to 6,000 square feet. We have a lot of vehicles, UAVs here. We actually can see here on the top right figure here, we try to emulate the urban environment, like how we are going to navigate these UAVs among these city buildings. We can also emulate the physical wind turbulence, some heat, some sand scenarios in this building. We also have some mobile UAS ground control stations. This is the outlook, the exterior look of the control station. This is the interior part of the control station, because we envision the air taxi vehicles could be potentially fully autonomous, like without any pilots in it, so we can take at least one more passengers. With that, that's all we have for the report of this project. I'll be happy to take any questions you may have.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for taking the time. Yeah, we already have some questions that have come in as you were presenting, but folks, feel free to keep adding them to the Q&A box in Zoom, as well as the chat box on YouTube. So this first question, you kind of discussed some of your future work already, but we did get a question about weather delays. So they were asking more in terms of this current project, but I think maybe this would apply more towards the future research. Do you plan to include scenarios of weather delays, such as high winds, snow, storms, such as that? Yeah, and what would that look like?
Yes, absolutely. So there are several ways of modeling this weather impact, because from my background as engineer in air transportation, we can consider that as either the capacity changes because of the weather, or some travel time constraints in the model. Like if from airport A to airport B, the travel time will be affected. And sometimes the links between these airports could be disconnected due to the weather impact. Absolutely, yes. This is some factors we can consider in the future work. We are not considering that yet, but this model has a future to take into account if we do have the data. For example, if we can change, if we have the statistics like how this winds, how this type of weather will like decrease this capacity by this much, or how it's going to increase the travel time by that much. So we can certainly consider that in the model.
Okay, great, thank you. And this next one's about time travel uncertainties. They're asking about your scope. There are many reasons for leading uncertainties. For example, when would you consider this time as an independent random variable or a variable physically impacted by uncertain wind vectors?
Are we talking about the travel time on the ground or in the air?
I'm assuming they mean the air.
Okay.
But if it's easier to address both, feel free.
I think it's actually can be addressed by both, because in this particular model here, the time is now there is a time window, right? So basically what we are going to change is going to be the time window, either the travel on the ground or the waiting time at the skyport. We have the experience of modeling these uncertainties in using the chance programming. Basically, it means actually using weather is a much better explanation. So weather is forecasted in the probability, like you have a 90% of chance of storm in this region. So in this case here, in our previous work, we actually model the capacity as a probability, depending on the weather probability. So in that sense, the model will be changed to probabilistic chance programming, meaning that the constraint can be satisfied by like 80%. And we do have a numerical methods, which is quite novel, which can be actually computed distributedly to solve the problem. I'll be happy to discuss that offline. ET is another research topic by another of my PhD student. So we do have the ability to consider these uncertainties formulated as chance constraints, and we do have some novel methods to solve these chance constraints using the distributed convex optimization. Okay,
great, thanks. So this next one's a little more up in the air. Are regulators keeping up and convincing the public that they are? I'm assuming this is about air mobility as a whole. I'm not sure that I don't know if you have any thoughts on this.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I actually have been talking regularly to air traffic controllers at Indianapolis Airport, and also some air traffic controllers at Purdue Airport. Overall, I don't think they like this new operations, but I think things are going to change as long as us, like researchers from academia and the industry, provide some kind of safeguard, or we want to make sure this is a safe thing to do. I think they will change their mind, because I think safety is number one, particularly for air transportation. It may not so critical for ground transportation. I'm not saying it's not important, but as compared to air transportation, absolutely zero accidents is allowed. So yeah, I understand from practitioners, from policymakers, they will have concerns, but that's why we are working on this harder problems. If we have a system, if we have a platform that can be proven to be safe, I think things will change. Just like autonomous vehicles on the ground, right? So things will change.
Sure. Yeah, I think we can, this next question, I think we're kind of continuing the safety discussion. So they're curious how your model accounts for ground requirements such as takeoff and landing, intermodal changes. I think some of that was addressed, but they're thinking of how these types of air taxis aren't going to be going to people's front door like a ground taxi, or maybe they will. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a very good point. We actually, when we started this project, we were thinking that the vehicle can pick up the passenger from any place. But it doesn't seem to be very practical. Like if you are like in urban area with the place, there's no way to land or depart. It's not really feasible. Yeah, so we just consider like we have certain skyports or vertiports like that can be either newly built, and sometimes it could be on some like big buildings roofs, some kind of concepts like that. So in this model, we don't consider you can pick up the passengers from their door. So there is a centralized like hub place you need to go to take the aerial vehicles. I'm not sure if that answers the question, but there are a lot of studies in that regard where you should choose these locations for skyports. Many factors to consider. We actually have I had a project with Professor Crossley, our department head, to study the needs based on the demands of the passengers in the Chicago area, where we can optimally build these skyports or arrange for these skyports. That's a very good point to study it, so we can combine the ground transportation to air transportation seamlessly.
Wonderful, thanks. Another question, they're curious if you've considered how to infuse equity into this sort of research, or if there are plans in the future.
Yeah, we had some discussions with many other folks in different areas. I think equity can certainly be modeled, but for this particular project, we haven't considered equity issues. I know there are many audience here from attendees list. I know there are a lot of experts who really do the studies in the equity for transportation. But yeah, I'm not in that area, but I will be happy to discuss how we can include those factors to be part of the model. But the current model doesn't have this consideration, but honestly.
Well, that's a future CCAT research project, it sounds like. So this next question is about eVTOLs. So they're asking at what flight altitude they're expected to cruise most often. There's a follow-up question as well. How much battery energy will be expelled while attempting to reach these altitudes? And how often will these batteries be required to charge or cycled between flights? I'm not sure if that's being talked about at all.
We did, I mean, in our literature review, when we formulated the problem here, we did look at these numbers. I think currently most acceptable kind of flying altitude, I think it's somewhere between 500 and 1,000 feet above the ground. Of course, there are many other restrictions. You need to consider the buildings, you need to consider the current commercial airspace, right? So you don't want to collide with the buildings or other airplanes. But I think there is a need to really make this urban air mobility or advanced air mobility work. There is a need to discuss how to restructure the airspace to make sure either the airplanes were shared airspace, like they fly to each other, or there will be some designated space at different altitudes to fly these vehicles. So that's something I'm aware of this issue, but I don't have the number in the mind because in this model, you can clearly see we don't have the altitude information. It has only route information. So if this is an issue, I think it's not going to be a problem to study or to include in the optimization model, because you just use a appropriate route to fly your vehicles. Sorry, I forgot the second part of the question.
It's more on batteries. So how much battery energy is going to be
that's
expelled,
a very good point.
and how much they're expected to charge.
Yeah, I think actually there are some commercial or prototypes of these vehicles depending on the design of the airplanes. I think that some commonly acceptable flying time is around like 40-60 minutes, because you are going to be flying in the urban area. You don't expect you're going to fly like 3 hours to a different city. There is also some other discussions in terms like the either robustness, or you need to conserve. You need to have certain reserve to time to fly, just in case you cannot land as you expect, which is a common practice in general aviation. So to answer this question, I think it really depends on the type of vehicles you are going to use, or the demands or the requirements, like from port to port requirements, how much time you need. There is also the consideration for safety or reservation has to be part of the study. And also in terms of charging the batteries, I don't have any experience with the batteries. So I don't know how long this will be charged. I don't even have an electric car, so I don't know how long it takes to charge a Tesla. So
okay,
I don't know.
We did receive a response
sorry, but go ahead.
Okay. So we did receive a response from somebody, and they mentioned that they believe the FAA Next Gen concept for 2020 indicates below 400 feet for urban air mobility. I'm not sure if you've heard of that.
Yeah, I'm aware of that because I'm actually a drone pilot. There is a certificate process I have to go through. I think the 400 feet above the ground, I think that's when FAA set up that kind of regulation, that number, I think that's probably when they are considering some like entertainment, smaller UAVs. When you fly some like a reasonable size of UAVs, I'm not sure 400 would be enough, because that's, in my opinion, is too close to the ground, to the people on the ground. But flying like smaller UAVs, like less than 20 pounds, that's not the issue. But if you have a bigger airplane to carry passengers in the air, that might be that number may not be enough. Just my personal view. I mean, depending on your ability of your vehicles, maybe that's doable. But if I am a passenger on the ground, or if I'm a pilot in the air, I will have this concern.
Okay. This next question is about time batching. They're asking if time batching would work with a sliding time window. They feel that having no overlap between time batches could reduce the optimization. Yeah,
that's a very good point. We tried several ways. We can certainly to do overlap between, like we do 10 minutes of optimization, and then we take 5 minutes of actions, and then we start at time 5 or 6 to go this forward. We can certainly do some practice over that. So very honestly, at this time, at least in the slides I presented, it doesn't include overlap. But the purpose of this of the slide that presented idea is actually to see if this method works or not. So optimality, certainly we will be able to study that if we like create the overlap between windows, or how much overlap we should have between among the windows, time windows. That certainly can be done. But what I'm most interested in is actually the time. Like if the problem is computable, like using the laptop right here. So as long as it is computable, we can certainly change these environments, like a different time window, different overlaps. That's a very good point. Yes, in terms of optimality, that is certainly something we should care about.
Wonderful. I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 more. This next one is a robust optimization scheme more attractive in such a time-sensitive problem?
Yes, the answer is yes. There are challenges. It's much harder to formulate it's much harder. It's very easy to formulate, but it's much harder to solve robust optimization. Yes.
I like that. Very simple. Yes. Yeah. When stochasticity is considered, would the optimization problem become infeasible?
You mean stochasticity? Yeah, it is possible because it really depends on the distribution, right? Or uncertainty that you model in the system. Yes, certainly, it could potentially cause the problem infeasible. We can change the model, of course, right? For example, we do have a penalty for unserved requests. That is actually in the beginning of the project, that is not a objective, that was a constraint. We expect everybody to be served. But certainly, if we do implement to the model, to change the model to include those uncertainties, if that happens, like the problem becomes unsolvable, we probably have to change other features in the model. But that's indeed a very practical requirement if we consider uncertainties.
Wonderful. All right. Well, I think that's about all the time we have. So I just wanted to sincerely thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us today. If you're interested in learning more about this research and more research from Purdue University, you can find the link in the chat box there, as well as on YouTube.